Hi, I'm Sue Roffey. I've been a teacher, parent, educational psychologist and academic and a writer, and I'm pretty passionate about what's happening in our schools today. I think that the curriculum is far too narrow at the moment, far too narrow. It's focused, and I'm not the only one who's saying this very loudly. Jeffrey Robinson is a great advocate of creativity in education. Yes, I do think we need to change both the curriculum and the pedagogy. I'm at the moment writing a very short chapter for a book which I hope will be called Creating the World We Want to Live In, which is a colloquium of about 7 positive psychologists, writing chapters about different aspects of the world, and I'm writing 3, and I'm writing one about education, and looking at what do we actually need, what is a good education, and we need an education that is much more, a curriculum that is much more current, that is actually about learning to know and learning to do, absolutely, but also learning to be and learning to live together, and learning to actually change the environment and respect for the environment. I mean, if we don't think that, looking after the environment is something important and should be in the curriculum, we're well behind the times. Things need to be looked at really carefully. I would put in citizenship, I would put in, how do we actually grow good citizens? What is democracy all about? A lot of things that at the moment are not enough on the curriculum, because some of the other ridiculous things are things that kids don't actually need. Yes, they need to be literate. Yes, they need to be numerate. Yes, they need to be tech savvy, but they also need to be emotionally literate. In a survey that we once did in an organisation I set up in Australia called Wellbeing Australia, we did a survey, and one person said in that survey, although we have students who need help with their reading and writing, we don't have a literacy crisis in this country as much as we have a relationship crisis. And in fact, I think that I think things are beginning to improve, because I think there's a lot of young people out there who would really like things to be different. And the thing at the moment, of course, is that, state schools are straitjacketed with their curriculum in a way that independent schools are not, and that is very problematic. I like the International Baccalaureate rather than A-levels, because it's much broader, it's much more independent learning, and if I was Queen of Education here, I would actually have virtually all education done is project work in groups, collaborative project work, and I have seen some amazing project work and the learning that comes out of that. It's engaging, it shows agency, it's collaborative. At the moment we have such competition between kids that most of them end up feeling they're a loser because they're not top. When I was training school counsellors, I was part of a co-counselling situation where this 14-year-old came in to see the counsellor because he was very deeply depressed because this year he was 4th rather than 2nd in his class. Why are we giving kids those labels? When I did 2 back-to-back masters at the Institute of Education, and you either passed or you failed. And it's made no difference to my life at all. You're either good enough to get the masters or you weren't. It doesn't matter. And what's really important is that we work together to actually support and pull each other up, which is what you should be having in schools. If I was Queen of Education, I would actually have personalised learning. Now, in John Hattie's book, Visible Learning, he talks about relationship between teacher and student being the most powerful ingredient for effective education, which is really important. But he also in that book talks about some of the research on personal bests. And it's like, if you've got personal bests in education, then you stop having quite so much competition because you're competing against yourself all the time, which is so much healthier. And I think that there are schools, I know some independent schools where there is quite a lot of personalised learning. So if you had project work, you would actually have your young people keeping a diary or a reflective journal of what they have been doing, what they have been learning, what was exciting about their learning, what will they remember about it best, and what was new for them, but also about themselves and who they're becoming. I became, took responsibility in this particular project. I learned how to, do technology, a particular sort of skill in technology. So that sort of personalised way of doing things is less competitive but more effective. And it stops some of the things that are actually creating mental health problems. We have actually got an education system, and nobody's talking about this at the moment, or people in my world are, but there's nobody in government. All the conversation is about picking up the pieces, identifying kids with mental health difficulties early, rather than saying what are we doing that's actually causing some of these mental health difficulties. And teachers tell me about the levels of anxiety in schools going through the roof, and we know about the number of kids being admitted for self-harm. Something is very awry in our society, and education is part of that, despite the best efforts of some of our educators. And that includes teachers and head teachers in places and educational psychologists and other people. What they don't have in Glasgow is they don't have any pupil referral units because they don't have anybody permanently excluded. They say it's our children. They all belong here. We will find ways of helping and supporting them. And sometimes, yes, teachers need a break from those kids, if they're really challenging. But if you give teachers enough skills and they work together to actually sort of, so it's not all on one person's shoulders, then you've got a much better environment for learning altogether. Well, if you think about Bronfenbrenner's ecological model, you've got the socio-cultural issues at the top, and a lot of the things that are problematic in school, and most teachers will actually say that, are actually coming from the top. We're changing the Ofsted framework. They are going to be looking more seriously at wellbeing, so that's all really good news. There are some nice things happening. But in terms of a whole school, I think it's really important that school leaders take a serious role in thinking about what wellbeing means, not just sort of a piecemeal, doing a bit of this and a bit of that, but what wellbeing means across the whole school. There was a good movement many years ago called the Healthy Schools Initiative, which fell by the wayside, but that had a lot of similarities to what we're doing around wellbeing. If you don't actually have senior leadership with a vision that they communicate to the rest of their staff and their parents and community, then everything stays at a piecemeal level. So it needs, you can still do great things. I've got teachers who've come and learned how to run circles in their classes, and they're doing great stuff in their classes with those children. But when then the children move on, it's problematic. And I think that there's also a lot of really good stuff going on in primary schools because they've got a bit more flexibility. They get to know the pupils and the parents better. But I think that we have a lot of problems in our secondary schools, and children are given a bit of agency in primary schools, and they get to secondary schools and it's regimented. And people talk a lot about discipline. Now, discipline for me is an imposed military term. We've got to be thinking differently about distressed children and what we can do about distressed children. There's a lot of talk around adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and the trauma that children are actually experiencing. But it's about actually how children will actually behave differently in different contexts. And I think it's possible that schools can be a place of stability, of security, of care, if that is something that the senior management sees as central. And one of the things, talking to Maureen McKenna, talking about the fact that well-being is at the core of what they're doing, and surprise, surprise, academic outcomes improve, We know I was involved in the Australian Federal Scoping Study on approaches to student wellbeing, and in that study we found that if wellbeing is at the heart of a school's endeavours everything else follows. You get more pro-social behaviour, you get better engagement, you get better mental health and resilience, you get better teacher well-being, because when you have a focus on social capital and the quality of relationships across the school, then that benefits everybody there. And of course, you know, we also need to engage the parents and community in a positive way. I was at a school once where I was doing a bit of work with them, and as I was leaving the school, the deputy head teacher, whose responsibility was student wellbeing, said, in this school we have no suspensions, no detentions, no exclusions. They were doing everything around a restorative approach. And I said, well, you know, what have you done about persuading parents that that's a good way forward? And he said, we're very clear about what we're doing and why we are doing it. And yes, there were a few mumbles and grumbles to start with, but now every parent knows that this is how the school runs and they accept it. And I also know that we've involved parents in running things with them around circles, so they can actually be engaged. Some schools I know have invited grandparents in at Grandparents' Day to be part of the circle, so they actually know what's happening. And teachers say how much they have learnt about emotional and social skills by doing this stuff. You know, it's not rocket science. You know, and the thing about it is that it's actually more complex than rocket science, because it's not happening as much as it needs to be happening. But when people are doing it, they're finding out that the benefits are just enormous for them, for their communities. And just to start building this so that, you know, rather than schools being in competition with each other or kids being in competition with each other, we actually start to promote a collaborative endeavour in which people are looking at how are we going to ensure that as many of our kids as possible flourish in their lives, authentically flourish, which doesn't mean, you know, getting high grades and then getting a job in which they earn millions. You know, not everybody's going to do that, but they need to be flourishing in their families so they themselves become, you know, good parents. We're actually not just looking at kids now, we're looking at intergenerational change. So we have a society that benefits everybody, and at the moment we don't, and it's getting worse. So we need to be actually shifting from the very top what's actually happening in our education system.